So power-bobbering, speed corking, whatever you want to call it, it's a technique that's used usually when the fish are deeper. You need to be able to mark them on your electronics, which means, you know, a little bit deeper, 15, 18, all the way out to 30 plus feet. So the basic concept is you have your bobber rod ready. You drive over the fish, you graph them, you throw your bobber right back here, right behind your transducer, and with a heavy weight, and that goes straight down, and you fish above the fish. Let's say it's 30 feet of water, you're marking fish in 25. You put your bobber at 20 to 22, somewhere in there within that realm, and get it down there as fast as possible. What happens is that jig falls down right in front of their face, they see it, they come up, and it's a pure reaction bite with a bobber, which is what a lot of people don't think about, a reaction bite with a bobber. They think they sit and look at it and then take it when the fish are a little neutral. And that's not the case. You give it 30 seconds, and if a fish doesn't bite, give it at maximum another 30 seconds, and if the fish doesn't bite, reel up, either go through the same fish again or go find new ones. That's why they call it speed corking or speed bobbering or power corking, because you're simply processing fish. You're going through, maybe only 10% of the fish you throw at are gonna bite, sometimes 30-40% of the fish are gonna bite that you throw at, but that's why the technique gets that name, is because you're not sitting on one spot and spot clock, sitting there watching a bobber bounce up and down. You're going and finding the fish, throwing it on them, and they're either gonna bite or not bite. It doesn't work as good in shallow water just because you can't mark enough fish. You know, you tend to spook them. It's used in midsummer when the fish get a little spooky. You can drive over them and throw a couple of corks behind the boat and get that reaction bite on them. It's used a lot when the crayfish molt on Mille Lacs, when the fish creep up onto the rock reefs and they're on the edges. You just pitch your bobbers back, make sure they're set right. And when I'm doing it, if we're on that bite, I'll have 3 or 4 setups. You know, one set at 20 feet, one set at 25, maybe one in that 18-foot range, depending on where the fish are. And then you'll just label them. You'll take a marker, label them on your cork, on your grip. That's that setup for that depth. And it's a highly, highly effective technique. The main thing, what I see guys messing up on, is you can use small bobbers with, you know, a 1/4 ounce, 3/8 ounce, and it'll hold it up. I prefer to use a big bobber that looks like a small weight, but that is actually a 1/2 ounce tungsten weight. So when this thing hits the water, it literally sails right down. And then on the business end of it, that is a Northland RZ jig with either a piece of crawler or a piece of leech that's an 1/8 ounce. So you're not getting tangled when that big piece of tungsten goes sailing down. You got this right behind it and it falls right underneath the weight. And 9 times out of 10, as long as the fish are on that bite, you're gonna catch them. I like using braid for my main line. It's really, really quick through the eyelets. It's really quick through the slip bobber setup. And then I always tip with fluorocarbon. Mille Lacs, I use anywhere from 6 to 8 pound fluorocarbon. Sometimes on Mille Lacs, I'm using just straight mono, straight fluorocarbon for my power or speed bobbering. It's personal preference. If you notice the fish are line shy, yes, use it. Lake of the Woods, Winnie, lakes like that, I'm sticking with my braid setup. I like the braid setup because you have the swivel there, which if you lose it, you're not gonna lose your tungsten weight and your bobber as well. So, and the rod, you don't need to go buy a $200 speed corking rod, a medium action rod. Truth be told, my bobber rod, I mean, of course I'm for rigging, jigging, I'm using all my tuned up stuff, but this is an old steelhead rod that was an 8.5 footer that has the perfect action for throwing 1/2 ounce weight and setting the hook on it. It hooks them, it keeps them hooked, it gets a nice bow in it to be able to retain that hook or that fish after you've hooked them. So you may ask, like, why not throw a jig and wrap or a puppet minnow or whatever right back on those fish when you're marking them? And the simple answer to that is bait. This is the fastest way possible to put a lively leech or a chunk of a night crawler in front of those fish if they're not chewing on artificial baits or, you know, any shiver minnows. It's a way to basically get that leech down there and squirming right in front of their face. Usually a lot of power corking I do is in June and the first part of July. when you start getting into the bug hatches, the minnows start moving in out into the basin and out of the rock reefs, that's when your live bait, your leeches are going to shine. Now the other part to mention is when I do go up to Lake of the Woods and you do get on a speed corking bite, there's nothing wrong with a frozen shiner on the same 1/8 ounce RZ jig thrown down there, and it works. Let me tell you, a lot of times you can go over these reefs and you'll see 3 or 4 or 5 fish, and instead of sitting and spot locking on 3 or 4 or 5 fish, throw your bobber behind it and catch 2 or 3 of those right away, and then you can assess the size, especially if you're in a tournament.